I've got one flame to burn, one race that I can say I ran.
Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 21047.com podcast. My name is Keith Cartwright. I am the host of this show, and I'm really glad to have you along listening in today, wherever it is that you are listening, and whenever it is that you are listening in. Hopefully it's while you are out there getting a long-distance run-in today. That will be very appropriate for this conversation. Today's episode is sponsored by my good friend Missy Blacker. Missy has sponsored this show and this effort for quite a while now, and I am grateful for that. She sponsors me through the Patreon platform. Patreon is a place where you can go and back folks financially on a monthly basis. So you just commit to a level of financing each month, and that just supports everything I try to do here. So I have a little part-time job I do in addition to my full-time job, and the more support I get through Patreon, the less time I can put in towards that part-time gig and spend more time podcasting and interviewing very cool people like you're going to hear today. So thank you, Missy. Thank you for all of my Patreon supporters and the folks who listen in that make it worth their while to back me on this. Thank you. If you want to learn more about Patreon, just go to my website, 21047.com, TWOTIM47.com, and just click on that Support Me tab, and you'll learn all about Patreon and how you can click on that and get to the Patreon page. Today's episode is an interview with my friend Stacy Saunders. Really, we've met online, have crossed paths out there in the running community a couple of times without really knowing it. The one that sticks out to me most after this interview and really learning about it going into it is we were at the Run the Bluegrass half marathon up in Lexington back in 2015, and we were both at the pre-race dinner when our mutual friend Harvey Lewis spoke. Harvey is an incredible runner, has done some just real incredible things in the ultra community. Most recently got to catch up with Harvey this summer as he was running the Appalachian Trail in about 50 days. And Harvey was at this Run the Bluegrass pre-race dinner, and he asked everybody to identify something that they wanted to achieve that year. And so today's guest, Stacy Saunders, had written down that she wanted to run 100 miles. So in sort of one of those I get goosebumps moments to find this out, that I was there when she wrote that down, and then I had the chance to interview her after some 3 years later when she has just recently accomplished that goal after a lot of trial, tribulation, and failure along the way. It's just really cool that this interview really and this journey of hers started at the same time back there in 2015, and just to get to chat with Stacy and bring it all full circle here without even really knowing the full connection we had in that circle is just a real cool thing, and a reminder that we are all weaved together in some incredible ways, whether we understand that or not. And so I'm just glad that it was put on my heart to interview Stacy and that our paths have crossed, and I get to share her story of really just this power and value that there is in failure, and how we should never, ever, ever let that scare us off from taking on the things in our life that are just calling at us, reaching out to us, asking us to come tackle it. As we go into the new year, 2019, I think we all spend a lot of time kind of thinking about new life, new year, new goals. What do I want to tackle? And a lot of times the thing that stands most in our way of writing those things down and just going after it is just this fear of failure. So today's guest, Stacy Saunders, hopefully she'll minimize a little of that fear, maybe give you a little more boldness to stand up to that fear, and maybe understand that this thing we're afraid of, failure, really has a lot of value in it, so we probably shouldn't be as afraid of it as a lot of us are. So anyhow, I'm just going to get right over now to my conversation with Stacy Saunders. I want to welcome Stacy Saunders to the 21047.com podcast. So welcome, Stacy.
Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so this is a bit of an interesting one because a lot of people I invite on the show because I've seen some of the inspiring and incredible things they've accomplished in their running journey, and you fit that category. But to be honest, the reason you caught my eye and had me read a little bit more about you and dig in is how well you have failed as a runner. That caught my eye, and I wanted to dig into that a little bit more tonight, and we'll get to that, and I think folks will end up understanding that a little bit better. But first, can you tell me a little bit about how did you even get started in this crazy running journey?
I actually never really ran until I was about 29 years old, and I had gotten diagnosed at the age of 29 with COPD. I had struggled with lung disease since I was about 12 years old, probably even younger than that, but it really started to show itself whenever I was about 12. And I was just sick a lot and having a lot of asthma attacks and just having a lot of health issues related to my lungs. And the doctors told me that pretty much the only way I could increase my lung capacity was to run. And so obviously I wanted to try to get healthier. And so when I started running, I really just started running to breathe better, to hopefully find a journey to a place to where I wasn't sick anymore. And that was really my ultimate goal with running, was if they thought that could help me breathe better and improve my lung capacity, then that was what I wanted to do. So
now, how much of an athlete, how much running had you done before you were 29 years old and suddenly out there trying to run?
Virtually none. Because I couldn't run, because I couldn't breathe. So running was something I avoided. I hiked. I spent a lot of time in the woods. I'm from rural eastern Kentucky, and so being outdoors was something I had always done. My grandparents had a farm, and I spent most of my time there as a child, and so I was outside a lot, but no running.
So I started this running journey that I'm on about 5 years ago. I'm much older than you, or significantly older than you. I'm 54 now, so I basically started this in my early 50s. And but I was always fairly active. It sounds a lot like you, and but that first year that I took this thing on, I hated every step of running. I'm wondering how your relationship started once you started in on this. Did you start feeling better right away? Did you suddenly feel like, wow, this is the answer to things? Or how did that go?
Well, I mean, I can tell you this. Running was certainly difficult for the first year, especially. I started out just running a block and walking a block, and just gradually would extend my distance and the amount of time I could run in between running and having a walk break. And I did really enjoy it right away. I always loved running. It just felt free. It gave me something to focus on. It made me feel like I was hopefully making a change for the better in my health. And it gave me clarity. It just, running did a lot of things for me right away. I really took to it. But it was difficult from a standpoint of it just being really one of the most challenging things that had come up for me in a long time. It was just really a challenge. And so I just wanted to continue to push those boundaries, to push that envelope with my running. And I just, kept showing up basically and just trying to improve my runs every week.
Now, and again, we're going to get to some pretty long distances you've tackled. So clearly there's been an evolution from walking around the block to where you are today. Curious, what was sort of the first significant step in this ultra journey that you're on now? What was the sort of the inciting moment where you started on this path where you just kept building and building and building?
Well, I didn't, I had never even ran in a race until 2012 when I ran a 5K that was local to me. My husband actually registered me for the event. I really didn't even want to be there because running around other people was something that sounded horrifying to me. I was just really embarrassed to have other people see me run or hear me breathe when I run. And it was summer when the race was. It was really hot. So I knew with the medications that I was on that I overheat really easily. And so I just knew like it was not going to be a fun time. And I was so nervous about it that, of course, it wasn't a fun time. I was like, nope, I never, ever want to do another race again. Those are famous last words, as I'm sure you know. But, you know, like everybody else, I mean, I just started with a 5K, and it just kind of built from there. I just wanted to continue to challenge myself. So
I'm curious.
I just kept registering for bigger distances.
And I'm curious, Stacy, because you just said something there that I'm sure a lot of new runners or potential runners would say, and especially as it pertains to a race that they were afraid of what other people might think. They felt some way, they feel insecure about getting out there. What would you tell folks, or how did you eventually kind of get into a place where you felt more comfortable in that race atmosphere? Because I know there's just a lot of people out there that feel that same way, that same hesitation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, first of all, I think that you can tell people all sorts of things until they show up and see it for themselves. It's not going to really sink in. But you know, the running community, in my experience, is one of the most non-judgmental places you can be. And at every event, in every distance that I have ever competed in, there are all sorts of people there. There are people of various ages and backgrounds and sizes. And, you know, some people look like they might be a runner. Other people, not so much. You know, what makes someone a runner is the fact that you run. And it really doesn't matter how fast you're going or how long you're going. I mean, you're out there running, and if you enjoy that, you know, then you're a runner. And I think that self-consciousness, the more that you do get out there and you get tied in with your local running community, I think that will disappear, only because you'll realize that other people had that same feeling when they first started out. And I just think that's a natural kind of progression. But if you show up at the events and you meet other people, then it'll go away, because you'll realize that other people, they're there running. They're busy thinking about their pace and their splits and their breathing, and they're focused on whether or not they're going to pass out or not. I mean, I can tell you for sure that in that first 5K I ran, there could have been 8 people pass out all around me, and I would not have even noticed because I was so caught up in what I was personally doing. So, you know, really the idea that anybody would have been staring at me or thinking anything about me is, I mean, it's really comical now, but, you know.
I'm laughing at that because it is so true now that I think about it. It's like I can't remember one time I've been out running when I wasn't so caught up and trying to survive most of the time for me that I would have no idea who's out there.
Right. Everybody else looks like a rock star, and you think, oh, I'm over here dying, and all these other people, like, they're having a great time. But in their head, you know, it's a challenge for them. So everybody has different challenges in running, no matter what level you are and where in the pack that you're at. I think everybody has different challenges in running, but I think that's also what makes running, it's what makes it a great sport and a great pastime is that everybody is working on something. And, and a lot of that is internal. And I just think that, everybody is out there working to do the best that they can do.
No, and that's why I love doing these podcasts. And it's very rare that I interview somebody that is an elite runner, because most of their stories are they're out there running to win, and that's a great story to have, but that's just a story very few of us are going to have the opportunity to have. And so I'm just always really curious what everybody else's stories are. I know those folks are out there to win. Why are you out there? What are you trying to accomplish? So I think that feeds into what you're saying. And so talk about progressing then. This 5K was a bit of a struggle for you. And what was next then? I mean, you never say never. You said never, which means, okay, you're going to run again. So what was next?
Right. I ran a handful of more 5Ks locally, and I met up with a local group that was just getting started in my area called the 5K Crew, and it was a bunch of people who were also new to running. I mean, running as a hobby was kind of new to this area in general. And so at that time, and, so I hooked up with them, and we just started talking each other into all sorts of dumb things. So before I knew it, I had registered for a half marathon, and my first half marathon was at Run the Bluegrass in Lexington, Kentucky in 2013. And I loved training for that. I trained for that all winter, and that was kind of my first taste at running farther, just slowing down my pace a little bit and pushing the limits of what I thought my body and my lungs could do. And I kind of fell in love with the discipline of the training plan, and feeling like I don't know, I felt empowered, I guess is the right word. And that's kind of where I fell in love with longer distances. And from there, I ran the Columbus Marathon in fall of 2013. So from the time I ran my first 5K, about 14 months later, I ran my first full marathon. And so it was a pretty quick progression for me. I'm a little, I guess, routine is something that I like. So I'm a little obsessive about that. So kind of once I get into something, I just kind of like to delve deeper and deeper into that. That's probably a personal problem, but so distance running kind of became that way for me.
I listened to you on an earlier podcast today. I think it's the 10 junk miles. Is that what it's called? Is that right?
Yeah, 10 junk miles.
Yeah. So I listened to you earlier, and that's when I heard you say that the Run the Bluegrass was your first half mile. So that was your first half marathon, and so that was my second half marathon. But for all practical purposes, it might as well have been the first or the most impacting race that I've ever run. My first half marathon was in Richmond of November 2014. So that was really the first, and that was the first race I'd ever run. It was the Richmond Half Marathon. And so then there was a bunch of us that went to Run the Bluegrass there in the spring of 2015. Our mutual friend Tracy Outlaw brought a bunch of us there.
Sure.
And I guess I grew up in Ohio, so I'm real familiar with Lexington and the horse country. I don't know why it didn't register to me that this is going to be hilly country, but it didn't. And so I'm here in Ashland.
I think that's all we have in Kentucky. It's hard to find a flat spot sometimes.
Oh my goodness. So all the running I'd ever done is I can run 20 miles around town, just different streets and so forth here in Ashland, and get an elevation gain of about 3 feet. So going to Run the Bluegrass blind, had done very, very little training, period, zero training on any hills. I Well, Tracy Outlaw and I were almost not friends after that race because he ran with me the last 4 miles and he kept talking to me about running the tangents and giving me all sorts of running advice. And finally I told him, do you know how close I am to death? Do you know tangents mean nothing to me right now? And I swear I think it was 2 weeks after that race before I could run again. What?
Yeah, Run the Bluegrass is really it's a really difficult half. It's also, I'm sort of biased. I am an ambassador for that event, but to me, it's still one of the most gorgeous courses that I ever have ran on, and particularly for a half marathon, being there at Keeneland and the thoroughbred farms and just the whole, spirit of the race. I just love everything about it.
Yeah, to this day, it's the only race I've done 3 times. And this past spring,
awesome.
that first race I did in 2015, I was right around 3 hours and near death. This spring, I went back, and I think at the time it was my 13th half marathon. And I ran my fastest half marathon ever there this past spring. Is right around 2:20, which I think I heard you say was what you ran your first time. But I think that was may still be my proudest race to this moment, to go back.
That's great. I think that's a good time there.
Well, I know it was for me. I know there are plenty who ran faster, but for me that day, it was, like I said, I just never dreamt 3 years ago when I could barely get the finish line in 3 hours that I'd ever run that. So,
I think the best time I've ever ran there, and I've ran it every year since 2013, might be 2:02. I can't remember. Everything runs in together. I have never run a sub 2 half there. I haven't really tried to push myself there because I'm usually using it as a training run, or I've usually just ran something stupid a couple weeks before. But yeah, it's a really difficult course, and I think it's a difficult course for anybody to sub 2 on. I think if you can sub 2 on that course, you're a superstar in my book.
Nah, me too. But you're right. It is just a beautiful, beautiful place. Every mile of it is just something to take in. So I was listening to that podcast today, and I was actually running, and you and I exchanged a quick message that I actually got sort of chills and goosebumps when I was listening to the podcast, because it came out that you were at the 2015 pre-race dinner where I was. I actually came up there with my buddy Scott Menzies, and that was the year they did a lot of honoring Meg's Miles and Meg. And so Scott actually spoke at that pre-race dinner for a bit, but our mutual buddy Harvey Lewis also spoke there. And you talked about on your interview today that at that event, and I remember this vividly, Harvey, and I think Harvey had just come off of Badwater or doing something fairly impressive, which he's prone to do. And
Badwater. Yeah.
Okay. But he had asked everybody to, I think, write down something that they wanted to accomplish that year. And you wrote down what?
I wrote down that I wanted to run 100 miles. And I had been, following Harvey a little bit. I was familiar with him. And I had already, at that point, I had ran my first ultra at Tunnel Hill in the fall of 2014. So that spring in 2015 at Run the Bluegrass, I had already trained and had a pretty good distance event at Tunnel Hill. And definitely in the back of my mind, there was already some itching to maybe try to train for a 100-miler, and just being there and hearing his story, which, as you know, is just really interesting and extraordinary. And when he asked us to do that, I wrote down that I wanted to run 100 miles, and I actually hung that paper on my refrigerator, and it was on my refrigerator maybe for about 2 years until I actually registered for my first 100-mile event at Tunnel Hill in November of 2016.
What was it about, and I ask this because I'm kind of on a similar path of just wanting to see how far I can go, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But in the back of my mind, I don't know, there's something very intriguing about that 100-mile number. I'm curious that night what it was. Was it just the next step, logical step after 50 miles, or was there something particular about that 100-mile threshold that was calling you?
I just think that running for me, when I first started running a block was a challenge. And when I was able to run a block, I wanted to run 2 blocks and so forth and so on. And I feel like that running has been a way for me to push myself and to challenge myself physically and mentally, and it's a way to feel empowered, and it just makes me have this feeling of having a lot of strength, and both physically and mentally. And I don't know, it just does something for me. And so once I had ran 50 miles, yeah, I mean, I don't know that it was the next logical step necessarily, because I knew it was going to hurt, and I knew it was going to be really difficult, because my first 50 miler, after I did that, of course, I said never again also. And I can't even tell you how many 50-mile races I've ran now, but I just want to do more. And, you know, even the 100 miles, I mean, now that I've accomplished 100 miles, I mean, I have so many more and bigger things on my plate. So I don't know if it's that number itself was magical. It's just that, you know, it was just representative to me of strength, because all of the people that I know that can run 100 miles, I mean, there's some really freaking strong people,
right,
and I admire them. And I think it comes into that factor of grit. You know, they're just people who can dig deep and find something within themselves when it's really difficult to find, and when your resources are low, and that just that grit that's required, and the grit that's displayed by other people in ultras. I think that's what draws me in and kind of keeps me coming back for more and bigger things.
I'm curious, Stacy, and I'm always curious about this with runners, and especially ultra runners and these folks that are going out running 100 miles and accomplishing these incredible feats. You said that running has really become a way for you to push yourself physically and mentally. Was that a part of who you were as, say, a kid and a teenager? Has there always been something in you that was drawn to challenge, looking for ways to push yourself? Or is that something that maybe was born in running, or maybe running brought this out of you? I'm always just curious where that comes from.
No, I mean, I think I was very driven even as a young child. I was really focused on academics early on in my life, and really until my late 20s, all of my sort of achievement need and drive and efforts were focused on school. And so, you know, kind of that need to push myself and expand my mind, or what I thought was possible for me, is always something that I've really been into, and just kind of just a perseverance sort of thing, and being able to tough things out for a long time. So that was kind of always something that, you know, has I guess, just been a part of my character. It's just been a part of who I am. It was just expressed in a different way.
Right, yeah. So you wrote it on the piece of paper, 100 miles, you hung that somewhere where it could talk to you and speak to you for a year or two, and then you finally registered. What was that first 100-mile race that you attempted?
The first 100-mile that I attempted was at Tunnel Hill in 2016. I had ran the 50 there in 2014 as my first ultra, and I wanted to go back to Tunnel Hill because I knew a lot of people who were going to be running there. They were part of my running group, Run It Fast, and Steve Durbin, the race director. I really like Steve and his wife Terry. They're awesome people. And so I just thought, that's where I wanted to make 100 miles the first time because, everybody that I knew was going to be there and my ultra journey had started there. So that's why I chose that race at that time. But it didn't really turn out the way I wanted to that day.
And you came up short. How short did you come up that day?
I think I stopped there around mile 55 to 60. There's like a little midway aid station in there somewhere, and that was where I dropped. I ended up having a couple of things happen that day that sort of destroyed my race. I ended up getting really sick, and I think it was a combination of maybe having picked up a bit of a stomach bug, but also I was using some salt supplements that I probably really didn't need, and it upset my stomach also and just threw me out of whack. So I had started getting sick about mile 21, and so I was sick for a good 35 miles before I dropped because I really, really didn't want to drop. But it was super cold. Tunnel Hill is typically a cold event. It's in mid-November in Illinois, and it just always is cold. And so I got hypothermic, and I just really couldn't continue.
So I'm curious, coming out of that race, you had been thinking about this 100-mile race for, over a year or so, and obviously you had trained for it, pointed to it, it meant something to you. When you knew it wasn't going to happen that day, where did your mind go then?
Well, I was I was upset for a little bit, but then, I knew that there really, I was just more, just trying to question myself and consult with people about getting my nutrition right and figuring out if it was those stupid salt caps or, what happened that day. And I just kind of, tried to focus on some other things for a little bit, other races, and think about choosing another race. So I knew I wanted to try again, but I also knew that I would probably have to build back up again and take a little bit of a break because I had trained pretty hard and for that event, and I felt like my body was a little broken down from the training cycle, to be honest. And so I decided to give myself a little breather and kind of rebuild until the next fall.
And that's when you went after attempt number 2 at 100 miles, and that was at a different venue, right?
Right. So I decided to go to the second 100-mile attempt at Yeti, which is on the Virginia Creeper Trail in Damascus. And I actually did my second and my third attempt there. But the second attempt, I had foot issues. So it's a warm event. Typically it's in September in Virginia, and it's kind of warm and humid down there at that time. And the way the course is, there's a steady decline, and it's not a super steep grade, but it's noticeable. It does impact your pace. It does impact your quads when you're going down. it certainly doesn't feel flat, especially the first 17 miles. I mean, you can definitely tell you're going downhill, even though it's not at a significant grade. And it just ate my feet. I think my socks were probably not the correct socks for that course. I had tried putting some new trail lube on my foot, and I don't know. I just sometimes think, oh, let me try this or that, and it's not necessarily a good time to try those things because it's during the middle of a big event. I'm really bad about that, about making bad decisions going into a race. It turns out I'm probably really outstanding at that. And so I had just made some bad decisions with my feet that day. And so I had 14 blisters, basically a blister on every toe in every part of my foot by the time I got to mile 33. And I suffered with those blisters until about mile 60 again, somewhere close to there, I think at the Taylor's Valley aid station, maybe a little farther. And so I dropped there at my second attempt around mile 60 again. And I just couldn't go on. My feet were so painful. And it was really disappointing because I never even hardly had a blister before. I'm not a person that's blister prone typically. So for my feet to be in that shape was really unusual. And it was a bad day.
So strike two, you've tried this twice.
Right.
And so I should add here too, when Stacy talked about being academically driven when she was young, Stacy is a psychologist, so she's clearly well aware of how our mind can work for us and work against us. Where was your mind coming out of that one? And again, it sounds like both of these were more, even if preventable, physical sort of challenges that overtook you.
Right. My mind was just this is crap. I was just frustrated. But at the same time, I felt like they were legitimate drops because I'm not really sure at Tunnel Hill if I had a stomach virus or not. It's hard for me to believe those stomp caps. I mean, it's not like I took a whole bottle of them or something. It's hard for me to believe that was the only thing that made me sick that day. But I was frustrated, and I was so ready to be done with failing. I was over it. And I knew I had been training really hard, and, training for a 100-mile event, it's really tough on your body. It takes a lot of time. It beats you up. And, I was just tired of training so hard to suck so bad on race day. It was really disappointing.
Was there any thought at this point? I mean, are you obsessed with it at this point? Is it just, I'm getting this thing no matter what it takes? Were you contemplating that maybe this can't get done? Where was your mind at this point in terms of how determined you were to still make this happen?
I was still really determined. I was not feeling deterred at that point because I felt like, okay, well, those were legit drops. Maybe somebody could have got their feet in order. I tried to that night. It just wasn't working out, and I was losing so much time. But, I knew that the shape that I was in, I just really couldn't have gone on. So I was still pretty determined, and I just kind of tried to use some positive psychology and tell myself that, the third time's the charm. And, and it's not like I had anything else to do, I guess, and in my mind for a hobby. And so I just kept running.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the whole conversation. I went down to Georgia this summer to run the Georgia Jewel, the 35 mile. They had 35, 50, and 100. So this was going to be my first ultra, the 35 mile.
Oh, that was a really fun one to pick.
Well, yeah. And so it was, I'm awful in the heat. I mean, once it's hot and humid, I know I'm in trouble. I don't know if it impacts everybody to the same degree it does me. It just really feels like it hits me harder than usual. And then I also have a really difficult time gauging and getting down my nutrition and my fluids in that environment. So anyhow, I was really hoping for a cool day down there early September, and what I got was 96, and I don't know, the heat index was something around 100. So at mile 18, I mean, I was hallucinating. I just could not. I could not go on, and I walked away from that really disappointed. But it was one of those where that was just. I trained really hard. I mean, I went out of my way, even though it's flat back here. I found some hilly trails. Went to Charlottesville to run those. I ran steps. I got on stairs. I did a lot of things I never had done, and I just didn't feel like I could have trained any harder. It just physically that day, it wasn't going to work. But I walked away from there saying, I'm not done. I'm already signed up next year. So I appreciate your attitude. So the third time, I believe that was just this past September, right?
Right. So the third time I went back to Yeti, and this past September in 2018. And, listening to you talk about that, one of the things that I think about, from every race that I've struggled through or, not been able to finish, all of those races have taught me something, and they've taught me invaluable lessons, as I'm sure that you learned a lot of, invaluable lessons that day at your event. And, so at Tunnel Hill the first time taught me a lot about nutrition and where I was messing that up. And the second attempt at Yeti in 2017 taught me about taking care of my feet better and not doing things just because other people are doing them, like to listen to my body and my gut and do what I know works best for me, even if it doesn't make sense to anybody else. And so the third time when I went to Yeti this fall, I was feeling really prepared. I have had a really good year in 2018 for me and my running and my racing, as far as being able to make several PRs at various distances, and it might not be fast for anybody else, but it was, a PR for me. And so I'll take that any day of the week. And I've just had a really good year. So when I showed up at Yeti this year, I felt pretty confident. I'd had a strong year. I'd had a strong training cycle. I was really ready to tackle the race. But unfortunately, the running gods and the universe had some more lessons for me to learn. And this year at that event, the lesson was, I'm a crazy pants person at night, and I get a really bad attitude and go into a really dark place, and I need a pacer. I need a nighttime pacer, because whenever I get into a bad headspace, I'm not at the point yet where I can work through that on my own at night, especially with all of the baggage I was carrying into that race psychologically. It was a lot, because it was my third attempt. I'm hooked into this great ultra running community, but unfortunately, for me, unfortunately, I should say, all of these other people in some of my running groups, they are amazing. And I felt like, they're really so much more amazing than me, which is why I really enjoy being a part of the group. And because I learn so much from them people, and I get so inspired and maybe enabled in a negative way to do all this crazy stuff that maybe I really shouldn't be doing. But I just had a lot of psychological baggage, because I thought, all these people are cheering for me and they're rooting for me and they've been helping me and they want me to finish this race. And so I had all this stuff going on in my head. So when it got to be nighttime and the foot pain set in, which for me, these days, as much as I run, and I usually train on asphalt just so I can beat my body up as much as I can in training so that on race day the trail feels easier. But I don't really get foot pain until about hour 16 or 17 now of being on my feet. But when it sets in, it is not cool anymore, and I am not having a fun time for a little bit. And so this year at Yeti, I got to mile 67, and that foot pain had set in. It was hour 17 for me, and I was making really good time. I mean, my time was awesome. And I had like almost 14 whole hours to do 33 miles, totally doable. And there was nothing physically wrong with me. I probably needed maybe a quick nap, a sandwich, and a kick in the pants to get back down the trail and somebody to talk to. But I just didn't have that. My family was crewing for me, which consists of my husband and my 15-year-old daughter. And, you know, they're driving all day. They're exhausted. You know, they can't pace me. They're just trying to stay awake and drive around. So I just got really self-defeating and didn't have anybody to sort of shake me and send me back down the trail, which is what I needed. And so I just quit. And I really even hate saying that out loud. But I feel like the more I say it out loud, it's therapeutic. But the fact is there was nothing wrong with me at Yeti this year when I quit other than a poor attitude and some sore feet. And I don't know. That's still really unacceptable for me, but that's the truth.
Well, and I'm curious, do you think not, and I realize the previous two attempts really had a lot of physical underpinnings to why you didn't finish, but not finishing those two, do you think it made it easier to say, I'm done on that third one?
I mean, I think all of that baggage was overwhelming, the weight of it. And I needed a distraction from that. And that's why I needed a poster, because I needed somebody to talk to and to distract me from all this noise and garbage in my head, and to make me believe in myself like I did the first 60 miles of the race.
Yeah.
But it was just like, once you, and I know it's not unique to me, but once you've been out there for, you know, a long period of time, you know, your mind, it does fantastic things. You know, like you said, you hallucinate, you know, you're just thinking all kinds of crazy stuff, and you're not rational anymore. There's, I mean, you might not be rational for being there in the first place, but you're really not rational at 1 o'clock in the morning on mile 67. It's just not a good place to make decisions. And so.
You know, Stacy, I heard you talking about this on the podcast earlier that I listened to, and it was, so I went 2 weekends ago because the whole Georgia Jewel thing hadn't set well with me. And like you, for me, I've had a really good running year. I've had a marathon PR, half marathon PR, got redemption on some courses that had previously ate me alive, Run the Bluegrass being one of them. And I was just going to have a hard time finishing the year with that whole Run the Bluegrass thing eating at me. So I found this little ultra in Southwest Virginia in this little town called St. Paul. It's the Oxbow Ultra, and they had a 6 and a 12-hour and a 24-hour race. So my friend Nicole was going to be over there in Tazewell with her family for the weekend. and she had run the Georgia Jewel with me. So she said she'd come down, we'll run that 12-hour race. It was made up of 5 mile loop. So my goal was to get 7 of them in and get the 35 miles that I couldn't get at the Georgia Jewel. Well, I ended up getting 30 miles. So for me, it was still the longest distance I'd ever run and the longest I'd been on my feet. But I experienced something brand new that day, and it really got me to thinking about this whole 100-mile thing. And what I experienced was that, so the race started at 9 in the morning. and we ran all day long. And by 5 o'clock, I'd been on my feet for 8 hours, and then all of a sudden daylight became dark. And that was something brand new to me. And mentally, I didn't anticipate the impact that would have on me. And our last lap, it was cold, and we ended up walking a lot of that last lap. But there was a woman who was running the 24-hour race, and she started at the same time we had. And she came by us by herself. She was running, and she ultimately would end up running 100 miles in that 24 hours. But when she went by, I started thinking that, holy cow, in her mind, she knows I've got to do this all night long in the dark.
Right.
And my very thought was, I could get through that 5-mile lap because I had my friend Nicole there, and we talked to each other the whole way. If I had been by myself, that would have been a whole different game. And I couldn't imagine, and I did, I thought a lot about that. What on earth is her mindset? What is she doing to tell herself, I can keep doing this in the dark by myself, loop after loop, for the next 12 hours in the dark?
And you know, it's very difficult, and I think that until you run from the early morning into the dark hours, especially, you know, after the time changes and it's getting darker even earlier, you know, like at Tunnel Hill this year, it was dark at 5:30. I ran for 13 and a half hours in the dark at Tunnel Hill this year. And at Yeti, I don't remember what time it got dark, maybe 7:30. So, I mean, and I was fine the first 5 to 6 hours. But it's after that first 5 hours and you've been in the dark and you're by yourself, it gets really difficult. It does for me anyway. That's certainly something I experience. And, you know, I'm not there yet as an ultra runner to where I can get through that at night completely alone yet. I think I feel more prepared now than I did before after making it through at Yeti, just because I feel like I don't have as much psychological baggage about the distance now. But it's nighttime is a really difficult time. And it's not just because it's night, it's because you've already been out there for a long time, and maybe calorically you're suffering a little bit, and definitely your feet are painful. You're starting to suffer there. And so nighttime is a suffer fest. And you got to like really learn to embrace suffering and figure out where the transcendence is in that in order to get through it, in my opinion.
No.
But it's a process.
No, and it became really clear to me. I'd always wondered, and I'd heard about these races where, you know, these folks had pacers, and I'm like, well, what the heck is a pacer for? I learned really quick.
The trail fairy that keeps you alive.
Oh my goodness, did I came to understand that real clear. And you did too, because then you just were not giving up. 3 strikes did not mean you were out. You decided you were going to go tackle this Tunnel Hill 100-mile. And when was that?
So I ran at Yeti at the end of September, and Tunnel Hill was November 10th. So after Yeti, I left there. I was pretty angry. But I was at the after party there and talking to some people from our running group, and they were like, you know, you really should go to Tunnel Hill. You've had a great year. You had no business of dropping out last night, and you know you can do this, and we think you can do this, so you need to get out of your own way and get this buckle at Tunnel Hill. And so I left there thinking a lot about, well, first of all, I got to tell my husband that I'm going to try to run 100 miles again in 6 weeks. And thinking, okay, I've ran 67 miles here at Yeti. Like, I need to take at least a week off to, just make sure everything is okay mechanically and I don't have any residual issues. And then I could hit up a couple of more long runs around town. And then I got to taper. I mean, I don't have a lot of time to mess around. That's only 6 weeks. And I got to figure out a crew because I knew I needed people at night. I knew I needed pacers, and I knew that it needed just to be friends of mine who I could trust to not let me quit unless a bone was sticking out.
Right.
I'm not even really convinced that they would have let me quit then, to be honest. They would have been like, it's a bone, it'll be fixed tomorrow, keep moving. But so, yeah, I talked to Steve Durbin, the race director, and was able to get into Tunnel Hill. And, and it turned out to be a good day. I said it after Yeti, when I was still undecided about whether or not I would go to Tunnel Hill. I wrote this. I'm always writing these really long, boring race reports like all runners do. And I don't know if anybody ever reads them or not, really, but I said in this race report for Yeti that, I didn't know if I would ever run 100 miles in under 30 hours, which is, the typical cutoff. But that if I was able to pull it off, that I felt like if it was on my path, that it would feel like home and I would be smiling while I was doing it, because that's just how I am as a runner. I'm a joyful runner. I'm not a miserable runner, or I wouldn't do it. And so, it just really gnawed at me in the back of my mind that, okay, Tunnel Hill is home for me. Like that's where I tried to do it the first place. That's where my ultra journey started. I'm going to have half the people on the course. I'm going to know them. And so I just couldn't shake it that, maybe that was my day. That was going to be my race. And sure enough, thankfully, finally, that was my day. So I was really happy to go to Tunnel Hill and be able to finally meet my goals.
What did that feel like, that finish line? I mean, was it emotional? I mean, you had tried this 3 times. And I'm going to tell you, I don't know of many people who would try something that difficult 3 times and face the sort of obstacles you did, and then 6 weeks turn around and go tackle it again. So what did it feel like when you finally knew you wrote that on a paper, in response to Harvey back in 2015, here you are 3 years later, 3 attempts later, finally getting it done. I just can't imagine what it felt like.
I mean, it was overwhelmingly cathartic and peaceful, and absolutely the right place to be in the universe at that time for me. I just felt like everything was in alignment. Like I felt like, it was just one of those feelings like, this is where I'm supposed to be. Like, this is what I've been training for. This is why I've learned all these lessons. So everything could come into place today. And, it's okay that if you fail. It's okay if you don't get something on the first try. To me, persistence is way more admirable at difficult tasks than just always doing things that are easy for you. So it felt right, and it felt like just everything had come into focus and everything had fallen into place. It was really an emotional finish line for me, for sure. I pretty much ugly cried. I ugly cried a lot through the night, but I was really, really crying in the finish chute, the last half mile, and I had pacers. My friends Bria, Jessica, and Lisa had come, and they had crewed for me and paced me overnight and kept me moving. They were amazing, and they were at the finish line. And I don't know if you watched that video or not from my race report, but it was just really emotional.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just super emotional.
No, and, and I said it in the beginning and didn't really explain it all the way through, but your story did reach out to me, and it really was this idea that you failed 3 times and then got it done. And I think for me, and again, this podcast is a lot about that. I say all the time that my running journey has taught me so much about my life journey, to the degree that they're even different, really. But I just don't learn much from people who go out and succeed all the time. They're in a different sort of category than me. But people who go out and try and fail and then can share those lessons with people that they learn in failure, that's a story that I can relate to, and I would dare say that's a story that most of us can relate to. I love that you pointed that out without even me asking, that you learned something from each of those races. And I think if we're all wise, that we probably, if we take some time and look back, we'll see in our own lives it really was the failures where we learned the most that ultimately set us up for success. So your story is awesome. I loved it.
Well, I really appreciate that. And, kind of on that same vein, I guess, for me, I'm not a person that, I'm a person that likes a challenge. Let me say that. I'm a person that likes a challenge, and I like doing difficult things, and I like doing things that maybe I can finish and maybe I can't finish. But I'm not going to know until I expand my horizon, until I challenge myself, until I push harder. And so that's what's really cool to me about a lot of people in the ultra running community, is just that drive to push further and to see what you can do. Because, you're either going to finish or you're going to learn. And maybe you're going to learn and finish that day, which is also always awesome. But, for sure, you're going to learn something. And then you're going to apply it, and you're going to go on, and you're going to do the next thing. I could go and just run 5Ks every weekend or half marathons every weekend. Like, I feel like I have that down. Like, I can finish that. That's easy for me. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to continue to challenge myself. Now, and speed is not something with my lungs that is ever really going to be in my wheelhouse, is to be a super speedy runner. And I know some people can stay at a half marathon or a marathon distance forever and really enjoy that because they're focused on getting a BQ, or, they're just constantly focused on time. That just doesn't interest me. I'm constantly focused on how can I expand myself, how can I challenge myself and grow in a way that's maybe a bigger distance or a more difficult way to do that distance. And I don't know, that's what inspires me. That's what I like to see from other people that I'm following. It's just that challenging of themselves, not doing what's easy for them. I mean, it's easy to go do what's easy.
Right.
I mean, that's boring.
Right. No, and for me, I tell folks all the time that the beauty in it is that it's not just in running for me. This podcast that I've been doing for about 1.5 years now, it's something I never would have had the nerve to do. I never would have had the nerve to reach out to Stacy Saunders and say, hey, can I call you and interview you and share a podcast? That's just wasn't me. But when you start running and pushing your body to distances you never thought you could do, it opens doors in running. Yes, you start to believe you can do bigger physical things, but for me, there's a lot of things on this other side of life that it's given me a little more boldness and confidence to tackle
Sure.
new things. And that's why to me, that's why I encourage folks, whether it's running or whatever it is physically, and whatever it is out there in front of you that you think you can't do, then go try it. And it really doesn't matter whether you succeed or not. It's just in the trying that you gain some confidence, because most of the time people won't try things because they think it'll kill them or hurt them or whatever. Well, once you realize the worst thing that happens is that I fail 3 times at 100 miles, well, guess what? It just makes that fourth one, when you finally do it, feel all the better. So,
right. It makes that buckle is so much shinier. I'm convinced that my buckle was the shiniest one Steve gave us that day.
Well, and that's kind of how I feel about that Georgia Jewel when I finally get that thing conquered. And hopefully it'll be next year, but we will see. So you made it pretty clear. You've left none of us with any doubt that, in my mind anyhow, that there's probably something on the horizon then beyond the Tunnel Hill 100. So I'm curious, what is next in your book?
Well, 2019 is going to be pretty busy for me. I have, in March, I'm going to Arizona to run Antelope Canyon 50-miler.
And can I just say, I saw that somewhere, and I was so envious.
The video?
Oh, my goodness, that's going to be a beautiful run.
Oh, it's going to be epic. I almost killed myself at Arches 50K in Moab this January. That was the hardest thing I have ever done in my entire life. And then when I left there, I was like, man, I got to do that again. It was so awesome. I thought I was going to die like 3 times. The cliffs had some snow on them. I mean, I was convinced I was done. It was so epic. And so I definitely wanted to do something along that line again in 2019. And so Antelope Canyon had caught my eye before, so we registered for that, and my family is actually going to do they're going to hike the half marathon while I'm running the 50-miler. It's on sacred Navajo land, and it's just, stunning.
We spent a few days out there a couple of years ago and went down in the, all the caves and the whole deal. It was just beautiful. And that was before I even knew they had a run there, so I've had my eye on that.
Yeah. I probably have no business running in the desert for 50 miles, but I think I can complete it anyway. So that's my goal in the spring. And then, of course, I'll be at Run the Bluegrass, and because I'm always at Run the Bluegrass. And then my big, really kind of stupid running goal for 2019 is last annual Vol State 500K, which basically consists of running 314 miles in a time limit of 10 days from a ferry in Missouri to a rock in Georgia, and kind of goes all across the state of Tennessee. And it's a really awesome adventure race and put on by Lazarus Lake, Gary Cantrell. And so I'm really looking forward to that. I followed that heavily for the last few years. It's been definitely calling my name. I needed to complete 100 miles before I felt like I could show up there. In my head, I know that there's been people there, complete Vol State, that have never run a 50-miler in a time frame in their life. But to me, in my head, that's what I needed to get done to feel like I could go there. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then I'm going back to Yeti in September. So Jason Green better just clear me a spot and put my name on it, because I'm coming back to Yeti, and I'm getting that buckle at Yeti.
I was curious about that. I wondered.
I will not rest until I have conquered that course. That course, we have unfinished business. I can't leave it alone.
I could hear that when I listened to you in the on the other podcasts, and you talked in a little more detail about all 3 of the failed attempts, and that Yeti one. I could hear that last one that you were not happy with yourself. So I had a funny feeling you'd be headed back there.
Yeah, it sells out in like 3 minutes, though. That's the problem. So, yeah.
I'm
hoping if Jason Green hears me calling his name a number of times, he will steady on me.
We will all be advocating for you. We want you to get that redemption.
Yeah. He was so disappointed in me. When we were at the after party, the next day, that night after the race had ended on Saturday night, he was like, I never saw it coming. He was like, I never saw you dropping this year. He was like, I just didn't see it. And I was like, just shut up. I mean, I didn't see it either, but I had nothing to say. I had no excuses.
Well, Stacy, I appreciate we went longer than I told you, but then once I read some of your stuff and I thought, it's going to be hard to keep it to 45 minutes. I'm glad we didn't. You are absolutely inspiring to folks like me who are probably not going to be successful at every run they attempt. So I loved talking with you, and I'm a lot more inspired about some of my upcoming endeavors. So I appreciate your time.
Well, thanks so much for having me on, Keith. And certainly I hope I see you again at Run the Bluegrass. And, I hope to see you on a trail somewhere and maybe at an ultra. So you can do it. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I will definitely be at Run the Bluegrass. I look forward to seeing you. And yes, I would love to cross trails with you sometime. I know you say you spend a lot of time down there in Damascus. I went down there when Harvey did the Appalachian Trail. I had a fun day that day.
Yeah.
I went down early in the morning, and my plan was just to hike up the Appalachian Trail, which somebody said was about 3 miles up, and meet Harvey there at the Virginia-Tennessee line. Well, I got there, it was dark, there was nobody else around, but there were 2 guys standing on a corner there in the little park, and I'd seen this trail, and I said, now, is that the Appalachian Trail? And both these guys, I should have known better, it was dark 30, they both looked like they'd been up all night doing something that probably had them out of their right minds, and so they said, oh yeah, that's the Appalachian Trail. I said, all right, well, thanks. So I took off running, and I was about 7.5 miles one way on it when I thought, wait a minute, this is not what was described to me. And turns out I was actually on the Virginia Creeper Trail. So I had to turn around.
They do intersect. Yeah.
Turn around, come back.
A little bit.
So I ended up doing a 20-mile run to meet Harvey that day, but I got a little bit of a taste of what he was doing for several thousand miles this summer. So that guy's amazing.
Right. Oh, totally fascinating.
Yep. So, I'd love to meet you in Damascus sometime. That would be great.
Absolutely.
Stacy, have a great weekend. Thank you again for your time, and keep on knocking down them goals, my friend.
Okay. Thanks.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, what a powerful conversation there with Stacy. I hope you come away from this conversation after listening to her, understanding that sometimes our fear of failure is misplaced. She put it out there, 3 strikes. She was not out. Just her persistence, her grit, just her determination to achieve this thing she wrote down. Sometimes it's really a trigger in our life to write something down, to put it up where we can see it every day, to take it serious, and just to remind ourselves at one point that was important. And so when fear stands up and tries to convince us that maybe this thing really isn't as important, because that's how fear works. It tries to convince us that this thing we really wanted to do really isn't as important as we thought it was, when indeed it was. If we heard Harvey Lewis talk and say, what's your goal? And we wrote this thing down, then at some point that was pretty important in our lives. So it's maybe circumstances change and it's not, but just don't let fear be the change. Don't let fear talk you out of something that is important to you. So it was a pleasure having that conversation with Stacy and hearing over and over the opportunities for fear to defeat her, to failure to trample her down in her pursuit of this 100-mile, to see time after time she just decided to learn from it, get back up and go and keep running, and eventually cross what had to be a really powerful finish line. I just can't even imagine it. Having been out there myself and conquered and chased after some runs that were really a lot further than I thought I could go, I kind of get a sense of that feeling now. I haven't hidden that someday I'd like to experience that feeling of crossing the 100-mile threshold, and talking with Stacy sure gets me fired up a little bit more about that, and specifically understanding that maybe that won't happen the first time I tackle it. It may take a few tries. So I'm grateful for Stacy taking her time, sharing that with us as we go into 2019. Just whatever you got on your mind that's out there, do not let this idea that it may not go well stand in your way. So anyhow, you all have a great week. Thank you for listening in. Get out there this week and run hard. And if running's not your deal, cheer somebody on. Be somebody's pacer. Like Stacy said, help them along their route when things get a little bit tough. And if running's not your deal at all, well, hopefully listening in maybe change your mind a little bit about that. And if not, keep coming back anyway. I think these running stories are really just great human interest stories, and I think they have some place in all of our lives, really, whether we are runners or not. So I thank you for joining in, and we'll talk to you next time.